You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, welcome everyone. You're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I am your host, Doug Thorpe, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Alfred Poor. Alfred, how are you doing?
I'm doing great today.
Well, thank you for jumping on. I actually had the opportunity to be on his show a few weeks ago, and we're kind of doing the reciprocal exchange here. And I thought he had some interesting information that everybody would be interested in hearing about. So, Alfred, give us your background story a little bit.
Sure. I have what you would call a checkered past. Includes everything from teaching middle school science to being a contributing editor for PC Magazine for over 20 years. Basically, I've made my career out of explaining things to people in ways that they could use. And
Nice.
So that's been through writing, a lot of writing, again, with PC Magazine and other major computer journals, helping people understand the PC computer revolution back when that was happening. Since then, I've gone to areas including flat panel displays and television technology. And most recently, I spent a lot of time on health tech, how wearables and mobile devices are going to change our lives through better healthcare.
Now, you have I don't know if it's a side business or an interest, as your placard in the back says, Speaker Springboard. Tell us about your speaking activities.
So, absolutely. So, like I say, checkered background. Along the way, especially back when I was writing for the magazines, I would do a lot of speaking at conferences and so forth. And then that was just pro bono to show the flag and help promote the magazine. In recent years, though, I've turned to making professional speaking a much bigger part of my revenue stream. And I've been doing a whole variety of things in that regard. But the story picks up in early 2020 when the pandemic struck, and all of a sudden on-site events were getting closed down. And so I'd be talking online or in chats with my professional speaking friends and colleagues, and they would say, well, I just got my last event for 2020 canceled. I guess I'm going to have to just sit back and wait till 2021 comes and things turn back to normal. And of course, we've seen that probably wasn't the greatest strategy. And I didn't think it was a good idea at the time because a lot of events were pivoting from on-site to online. One of the big poster children for this was a major corporate event that was being held in Australia that they held every year. And in less than a month, they turned it from an on-site event to a virtual event. And they ended up with 10 times the registrations, the 10 times the number of participants, because people didn't have to travel. And what's happened over the past 2 years is that we've gotten a taste for what virtual interactions can be. I mean, some of it can be bad. I mean, we talk about Zoom fatigue, and I don't believe there's such a thing as Zoom fatigue. I think there's bad Zoom fatigue, but it's no different than meeting fatigue. People aren't tired by meetings in their business in the conference room. They're tired of bad meetings. People will always go to a good meeting, and so I think the same thing holds for virtual. So what happened when these people started saying, I'm out of work for the next year, I started holding free workshops for speakers saying, here's how you can make the pivot. Here's some things you can do to come across better as an online speaker. And they were really well received, got a lot of really positive feedback. But in the process of doing that, I discovered, I've got a lot more information to share than I can cram into 1 hour. And that's where Speaker Springboard came from. And
Nice.
It's turned into a 10-unit online course that covers everything soup to nuts, not just the technical part, but also the strategic part about how to be a better speaker.
Very good. Well, that's so critical. I know in my own executive coaching business, I've worked with a lot of leaders through this pandemic. And as you say, the word pivot, and I know that was one of the top 10 keywords that came out of all this. um, leaders were having to look for ways to communicate better via the virtual world, and they were worried about engagement and worried about connectivity, not the technical kind, but the human kind.
It takes both.
Right, you got to have both, right? It has become a prime consideration for leadership effectiveness to be able to be that right kind of communicator, and how do you show up. And I like your point. People were tired of meetings long before we got Zoom fatigue, because I recall there were great videos out even way before the pandemic about death by PowerPoint, those kind of messages. So, well, that's interesting. I'm going to double back to your opening remarks. I was a big fan of PC Magazine in the time, as you said, the technology evolution and the whole advent of PCs coming into the workplace. And I know we got a lot of listeners that can't even believe there was once time we went to work and we didn't even have a desktop computer, much less a mobile device. But the evolution has been leapfrogged. And talk to us a little bit about, I'm intrigued by your mention of the wearable devices as maybe being the next thing we're all going to be looking at.
Sure. So to go back, back to the past of PC Magazine and the personal computer revolution. One of the things to keep in mind is this whole Zoom business could not have happened had it not been for the fact that there's more than one giant computer in each company. Each person is issued not one, but two or three. And now, as you mentioned about, the smartphone, it's a transformative thing, but this is more powerful than any of the desktops you could buy 20, 30 years ago. So we have processing power that's made enormous changes possible. And that leads right into the wearables, because before smartphones, the little devices that could tell which way is up or how a device has been moved, they cost $10,000 and they were as big as a football. Now, thanks to the smartphone and building, millions, billions of these a year, those devices are now down to the size of a grain of sand and cost pennies. And that's just one example. And so what's happened is the smartphone has created an infrastructure, technology infrastructure, where we have wireless communications, we have inexpensive data storage, we have powerful onboard processors that can do amazing digital data processing, and all at a price of under $1,000, hundreds of dollars in many cases. And so that technology is now, it's possible to put that in a watch. You can put it on a smart patch that attaches to your body. It can also just be a device that you carry in your pocket or is separate from you and is just sitting in the room. But they can do all kinds of things, from monitoring your vital signs, which makes telehealth possible because the doctor doesn't have to do a physical exam on you. You can have the devices in your own home to provide the information that they would got if they were able to put their hands on you. We can use it for helping our seniors continue to live independently in their own homes safely by monitoring them. It can provide adaptive technology for people with impaired vision or hearing or mobility. It's just amazing all the things that have been made possible by the smaller, cheaper, more powerful technology that we've got now.
Yeah. There's in the halls of business schools nowadays, there's always somewhere a story about how Steve Jobs said that the whole vision for Apple was not to build computers or build devices, but he wanted to change the way the world connected and interfaced with technology. And it happened then that the devices we now know and the evolution of even those was the means for changing that experience. So, quite a statement of vision at the time. It's like, I could only imagine being in that meeting, the first time he got everybody together and said, "Hey guys, I've got an idea. let's change the way people interface with technology. We don't need keyboards and mice anymore. Let's do something different.
And it's amazing. So one of the things about working with the health technology, I have a website and a newsletter that I publish for the industry. There's amazing stuff going on. There is now a product that's coming out that will take the impulses from your brain without using an implant, just by using sensors that sit outside your head. And they're going to be able to power a prosthetic hand, a prosthetic arm for amputees. So it can move and do the actions that you would normally do with a hand. Mm-hmm. And without an implant, without surgery, without anything like that. It's that's going to change people's lives in ways that we can't even imagine.
What are you focused on doing to make a difference in the world today?
Well, again, I go back to my superpower, which is explaining things, complex ideas to people in ways that they can put them to use. And so with the health tech stuff that I do, I'm not really that interested in for the stuff for exercise, for athletics and peak performance kinds of stuff. I'm interested in the things that are going to help people deal with chronic disease, to identify illness earlier, allow things to be treated sooner so it's more effective, and less costly, and get better outcomes. That's part of the whole mission. But then also on the speaker side, I'm convinced that there's far many more people out there than I who have important messages to get across for one purpose or another. And I see that I have something that I can contribute to help them be more effective at reaching their audiences, at getting that message across to people in a way that is going to change their lives. And so, I sort of see both missions as being really important to me, and a way I'd like to spend my time.
I agree with you. And again, I'm reflecting on my own experience working with business leaders of all shapes and sizes, companies around the globe. Inevitably, as I begin an engagement and I'm talking to a leader and I'm asking them, what's your perception of some of the biggest challenges you've got? Somewhere in the mix of the short list of issues they come up with, communication is in there. It may not be number one, but it could be 2 or 3 or 4. They're sensitive to that challenge of being an effective communicator. And one of the phrases I use as we dive into that particular work is and not even sure who told me this the first time, but it says, a confused mind says no. So if you've got a work team and you're wondering why they're looking at you with blank stares, there's a good probability that you haven't communicated the mission, vision, or task very well.
Yeah, it's explain it to me like I was an 8-year-old. And that's what people need. And the other thing, as a speaker, this, that if you're lucky, 20% of what you present is going to stick. And so, and for some speakers, it's less than that. But, I think that the key is that it's not enough to fill the time with talk. I think the idea is that you want to change minds. You want to lead people to places they haven't been yet and help them get a new perspective. I mean, my favorite, I go back to Piaget, the philosopher and educator, and he had the concept of disequilibrium, of cognitive disequilibrium. If your world says that this can be true, but also that this can be true, and you know that they can't both be true, then something's wrong with your view of the world, and you need to change your way of thinking to bring that back into resolution. And I think that's an important thing that we can do. I mean, that's what people do as a skilled persuader, is to get people off balance a little bit, and then say, okay, now here's how you can resolve that, and here's how you can think about that differently that's going to be effective for you. So yeah, definitely, it's not just enough to talk at people. You need to engage them and reach them with your message.
There's actually some brain science studies that I've read that refer to the fact that when we get in the so-called zone of our work, that there's some pretty negative things happening in your brain in terms of your horsepower or muscle that your brain can provide for solving complicated tasks. When you get in that comfort zone, those parts of your brain, the frontal lobes, tend to shut down and conserve energy, so they're not being challenged. And when they're not being challenged, there's no learning, there's no cognitive muscle memory being created. So you're in a kind of a cruise control, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about our brains is that it filters out 99% of the stimulation, which is, we wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything if we weren't able to do that. But as you say, sometimes that works against us and we end up missing things. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the video clip of the basketball game where the guy in the gorilla suit walks through the background and nobody notices it because they're, been given some other task. It's easy to see how that happens, but it's kind of funny to have a demonstration like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you need somebody to come along and say, this is fine, but what about this? Let me pose this situation or this question to you to get you thinking differently.
Yeah. I agree totally. Well, this is all good, Alfred. I think we're up on a break point here. We're going to take a short intermission and we'll be right back after this message.
This program is being brought to you by Headway Exec, leadership coaching and business advisory services. Visit us on the web at headwayexec.com. Now, enjoy the rest of this episode.
Well, hello again, everyone. We are back, and I am visiting with Alfred Poor. We had a good discussion about some technology things and also a big interest in a program that he's put together to help speakers, particularly in the virtual world. First question, Alfred, when we talk about the ability to be a speaker, who's really in that realm? Who else should be considering the kind of information you're sharing with people?
Well, that's a great question. When I initially did this, it was in response to the needs of professional speakers that I knew. And that's what drove the whole thing. But as I've proceeded with this, I've come to realize that the way we do business going forward is going to change. We don't have to travel as much. There's certainly going to be times when we do, and they're going to be good opportunities to meet with people face to face, but there's going to be a lot more of this virtual Zoom interaction that we've learned about in the past 2 years, and it's going to continue to be a part of how we do business. So it's not just professional speakers. Managers are going to have an increasing number of their people working from home. They're not going to be in the office for those in-person conference room meetings. And business leaders are going to be making deals and meeting with their opposite numbers online more than over the lunch table. One of my favorite stories came from early on in the pandemic. The CEO of Tata, which is one of the biggest conglomerates, if not the biggest in India. They're in steel and car making and media and just about everything. I read an interview with the guy, and he said, I was terrified when all of a sudden this travel was shutting down, because I would make 2 or 3 trips to other continents to put together deals, and it would take weeks. He said, in this past week, using video conferencing, I've closed a $500 million deal, and I'd never left my office. He said, this is great. And so, he's not alone. A lot of other people have figured that out. So industry leaders and business owners, C-level executives, and especially salespeople, because again, the mechanics of making sales are going to change, and people are going to be doing a lot more of this face-to-face like you and I have now over the computer. So these are skills that are really very broadly applied and accessible. I mean, I'm not talking about setting up an entire movie studio in your back room. I mean, there's a lot of small incremental things that people can do to get significantly better at being online.
Yeah. It is a multifaceted challenge, and I know there are still those who are struggling. Maybe they don't have the right level of bandwidth at their home office or in the break room, wherever they go hide out to try to get online. And that's a fundamental issue, is addressing the proper technology, getting your device upgraded to be able to handle some of that. But when you get past those technological things, which, by the way, are not necessarily expensive at all, as you alluded to, very fundamental things that can be big boosts in the effectiveness of it from a technology standpoint. But it gets down to the content, how you're presenting and how you're messaging yourself, and being able to get people's attention and really get the point across. So we were talking about that at the start. What are some of the things you coach people to do while they're in your program, if
Yep.
you can give us a preview?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one of the basic things is that, as a professional speaker, just about everything you've been taught about speaking on stage is wrong when you're speaking virtually, when you're at an online event. I mean, because we're told to stroll around the stage, anchor yourself, make a big point this way, then come over here and anchor yourself and make a big point. And you do that, you're going to make your audience seasick if you're doing it online. What I always tell people is, don't look at people who are speaking on stage as your model. Look at people who are on television. Go to your favorite news channel and watch how the moderators, how the presenters behave. They're either seated or standing, but they stand still, and usually they're framed so that you can see their hands. They don't have to put their hands up here to for you to be able to see them. So their gestures are more natural, and they do a lot more with their face, because the face is going to be one of the keys for engagement. And the other thing is, they make eye contact. They're looking at the lens all the time. I mean, we've all been through the Zoom meetings where somebody's talking to you and they're looking down here, and it's just, there's no engagement. How, it's not possible.
Right.
So it's when you're looking right at the lens and looking right at the person that you can make the engagement. And there are tricks you can do to make that work better for you. But you were talking a little bit about the psychology before. I was talking to a psychology researcher from Stanford a month or two ago, and he put me on to some research that I'd never heard of. And that is, they did work with audiences, looking at people making presentations, depending on with different framing of the image. And so they had the typical neck up framing, and then they showed more and more of the body. And what it turned out was, the more of the torso that you can see, the more you come across as trustworthy and reliable and and authoritative, which makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about it. But it works, entirely against the way most people set themselves up to come across on a virtual meeting.
Yeah. How many times have you seen a view frame where you got, half the guy's face?
Yeah.
And
Well, the one that gets me is this, they're like this,
right.
And they've got, all you can see is their ceiling in the back of the room or whatever.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I understand how you get there, but again, that's one of those little things that's so easy to fix.
Well, and I'm thinking now about just some subtle little things with lighting and so forth. Many times I've gotten online with somebody when we're doing our one-on-one, and they have this bright, shiny, window in the back with glare coming through, and they're just their face is totally washed out. You can't even see them. You see the outline of the head, but you don't see any of the face, and certainly none of the eye contact.
One of the things that I stress for people is, if you're doing this casually, that's fine. Whatever works. But if you're going to be doing this professionally, and I don't mean just as a professional speaker, but if you're, this is for business. I mean, if you're going to come out in a suit when you meet on stage with somebody, well, that's coming across with a professional business approach. If you're going to approach virtual as a professional, you need a lighting system that you can count on. Day or night, sun or rain, whatever. Ideally, you have a setup where you just throw a switch and you know that your lighting's going to be good and you don't have to think about it or mess with it.
Right.
And I mean, here where I am, I have no windows in front of me or behind me. There's one small window over there and another really little one way down there. But all the rest is artificial lighting, and I have it set up so that I can control it. Another piece on the artificial lighting is the ring lights are really popular these days, which makes sense. But one of the big problems is there's a large class of people who should never use a ring light. And I'm one of them because I wear glasses.
Wear glasses, you get the refraction.
And you get those bright white Cheerios reflected off the lenses. And I don't know about you, but I don't think it's a good look. I find it really distracting.
Yeah.
So if you wear glasses, don't use a ring light. Get some other lights that are diffused and off to the sides. I mean, if I turn this way, you can see that, there's a lot of light there, but when I'm looking straight at you, hopefully you're not getting a whole lot of flash off my lenses.
No. And actually, I do normally wear glasses, but for computer work, I tend not to, and therefore I don't have that lighting issue. But it's interesting about the ring light. It's not limited to spectacle wearers. Oftentimes, even in somebody's eyes, you can see that ring light, and it gives this really eerie effect of the way their pupils are rung with that white light, and that can be strange.
That's another problem with the ring light, because ring lights are designed so you put the camera in the middle, right?
Right.
Don't ever do that. That's the exact wrong thing to do. The reason that it's wrong is that ring light provides diffused, even lighting. And if it's shining straight on your face, it's going to be flat. There's going to be no dynamics. And it's going to be a very uninteresting look. What you need to do is take that ring light and set it off to the side by about 15, 20 degrees. And then you'll get a little more light on one side than the other, and it's going to be a lot more attractive.
Yep. And by the way, just there are several amazing videos that have been done that people are giving very short and to the point classes about that kind of professional lighting advice and opportunity. And again, we're talking devices that are not wildly expensive. They're very affordable for a home office setup, but it's really an important element as people move forward.
Yeah, if you want to dig into this on your own, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of videos just on YouTube about microphones and cameras and lighting and just all the different kinds of aspects of improving your virtual presentation. So there's a lot of good information there. There's also some information that I would say is a little questionable in the advice, but yeah, it's all out there.
So moving on, and technology aside, what are some of the other considerations that you encourage people to think about on ways to improve their online communication ability?
That I'll jump to the number 10 topic on my list, only because that's the sequence in the program, but it's really number one by the time you finish, and that's to rehearse. So many people will show up and say, "Oh, I've never been on Microsoft Teams before. How does this work?" Or, "I've never been on a Google Meet before," or, "I've never been on this virtual platform." how do I sign in? No, if you were arriving at a giant conference center and you were supposed to speak someplace, you'd find out where you were supposed to speak ahead of time, and you would find out how to get on stage, and you'd find out who you're supposed to talk to about getting mic'd up, and you'd go through all that. It's that important and much more when you're doing virtual. So if you're using a platform you haven't seen, get together with somebody so that you can get in and out and rehearse it and see how you're going to look. Make sure your text isn't reversed from your screen. They're just, all those kinds of things, because if you don't know how that works, you're going to start off on your back foot. You're off balance, not sure what's going on, not confident. On the other hand, if you know what's going to happen, if you know what button to click and what button not to click, and you know how it's going to start and how it's going to look, you're going to be confident, you're going to be solid, you're going to be, have that confidence that just radiates. And it's going to be so important to build the rapport with your audience.
Yeah, that is so critically important. I'm thinking of how many times and how much time I've lost waiting for a participant to figure out how to, what's the favorite phrase on Zoom right now? You're still on mute.
You're still on mute. Yep.
If people aren't familiar with it and aren't paying attention,
can't hear you.
All the hand signals and all the activity to get somebody unmuted to come online.
And one of the things is people say, well, I don't have time for that. Okay, but let's ask what you do have time for. You've got time to have this meeting or make this presentation or, network with these people. What's your goal there? Presumably you're hoping for an outcome ultimately that's going to be worth tens or hundreds of times the value of the time that you're putting in. You mean to say to me that you don't have another half hour somewhere in your day that you could put in to make sure that you got the full value out of that meeting? So it's a false economy in my book.
You made a point while we were on the break. We were talking, and you had a point about the significance of leaders and business people figuring this out. What were you saying?
So the point is, as with any technology, the early adopters and they're the laggers. And at this point, everybody knows how to use virtual meetings a little. And to my view, the majority of us are really not very good at it. And this presents an opportunity. If you can make just those few small incremental changes, maybe it's in lighting, maybe it's your camera, maybe it's in your backdrop, just a few little things that you can do to raise above the noise level of everybody else who's looking down here and out of focus, and you can't see them on all that. If you can be that much better, I believe that right now you have a competitive advantage because the other people aren't putting the time in or the effort to make those improvements, even though many of them are just very simple, they cost little or nothing to do. They're not putting that in. And I think in many cases, they're not even aware of the need to put that effort in.
Right.
And so if you can do that now, I think that you're going to have a competitive advantage over the other people that you're working with. I don't believe that that's a permanent situation. I believe that, just remember back before anybody had email, the first people to have email and felt comfortable with it and used it effectively, they had an advantage, and that lasted maybe a year or maybe two. And I think we're in the similar boat that, if you can get better now, you'll have that competitive advantage for maybe 2 or 3 years. But 2 or 3 years from now, those will be table stakes. Everybody will expect you to look good on a virtual meeting.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that is a trend that is continuing to grow, and the people that are doing it well are making good gains. in the market, and those that are still struggling are falling behind already. So, well, this is good stuff, and we've just about run out of time. Give us a website or a link. I'll put it up in a text box, but how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, they can go to speakerspringboard.com to find out more about me. But every month I put on a free demonstration about things that you can do to be better at virtual speaking.
Okay.
And it happens the third Thursday of every month. You go to speakerspringboard.com/demonstration
Okay.
to sign up for it. And again, it's, if you miss one, just wait a month, there'll be another.
Okay.
The one key thing to know about is I don't do replays.
Got it.
So if you want to see it, you got to be there.
Got to be there.
Then you have the opportunity to ask me questions and all that. So
we'll put that up on the screen there, and I appreciate you coming on the show, Alfred, and thank you for all your great information, and best of luck to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope we get to continue this conversation in the future.
We shall, I promise we will. Well, thanks everyone. This has been another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. This is your host, Doug Thorpe. I'm going to sign off, and I'll see you, and talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.